Hey there, Solid Rock Church. Pastor Jason here with a really important conversation about how Christians are to engage the world around them with the compassion of Jesus without compromising biblical convictions. And the question emerges after an event like what happened in Orlando, where a radical jihadist took the lives of 49 people and injured over 50 more, most of which are presumably active in the LGBT community. And so the question is, how do we respond as Christians to events like this? And so I think we see plenty of examples in our culture of how not to respond. From the wacko pastor in Sacramento who claims to be a Christian, who condoned this tragic event, to even here in our own city. If you go to downtown Fort Worth on a weekend evening, you're likely to encounter somebody with a bullhorn, yelling, shouting statements of hatred and condemnation. And so we see plenty of examples of how not to respond. Where do we find our examples on how we should respond? I think it's so important to understand that there is a significant difference between displaying compassion towards a person versus having a unity of faith with a person. And this is so beautifully displayed in the life and ministry of Jesus. In the Gospel of Matthew in chapter 9, he records that Jesus was traveling around to the villages and encountering crowds of people who were hurting, who were broken. And Jesus responds by having compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. In Matthew chapter 14, just right after hearing the news that John the Baptist had been beheaded, Jesus gets in a boat and he draws away in solitude. And then as soon as he makes sure, he's greeted by a crowd of people who are there to meet with Jesus, to encounter Jesus, and to hear from him. And we see there where Jesus displays compassion towards the crowd, and he heals their sick, and he feeds them. And the very next chapter in the Gospel of Matthew, Matthew 15, Jesus is on the mountainside there at the Sea of Galilee, and he says to his disciples, I have compassion on these people because they have been with us for 3 days and they have had nothing to eat. And so we see in Jesus' example this display of compassion towards the masses in a way where he's able to see their needs, their physical needs, their need for physical healing, and even to see their spiritual needs. We see this even more specifically displayed through Jesus' example in the woman who's caught in adultery. So the Pharisees catch a woman in an adulterous act, and they drag her out of secrecy out into the public arena and bring her to Jesus, and they ask Jesus, the law of Moses says that we're to stone her to death. What do you say we should do with her? And so Jesus responds by saying, you're right, that is the law of Moses, so let he who has no sin in his life throw the first stone. And one by one, these Pharisees dropped their stones and walked away. And so Jesus turns to this woman who's caught in sexual sin and said, where are your accusers? And she said, they're all gone. And so Jesus responds, well, neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more. And so we see this beautiful display of compassion and mercy towards somebody who's in sin. And so Jesus gently encounters this woman and calls her out of sin. We see this displayed again in Jesus' encounter with the woman at the well. And so he's having a dialogue with this lady who's just meeting Jesus for the first time, and he says to her to go get your husband and bring him back, and we'll continue this conversation. And she responds to Jesus by saying, Jesus, I don't have a husband. And he says, you're absolutely right in saying that. You don't have a husband. You've been married 4 times, and the man you're now living with is not your husband. And so rather than heaping up condemnation on this woman, he leads her in a conversation towards believing in the Messiah and understanding the essence and the heart of worship. And so through Jesus' example, we see a beautiful display of compassion towards those who presumably aren't followers of his yet, without compromising the conviction of truth. And I think in a even more specific way, in Paul's letter to the church in Corinth, we see this displayed. And in chapter 5 of 1 Corinthians, Paul says to the church, it's been reported to me that there's a lot of sexual immorality taking place inside the church, a sexual immorality that is not even found among the pagans. And so here's what Paul says. He says, and you're arrogant about this. Ought you not rather be in mourning about this? Shouldn't you be broken about this? And he says, let him who has done this be removed from among you. And so the Apostle Paul, anticipating that the Corinthian church would take his words after reading them and apply them to the world around them, the culture around them, he actually, a few verses later, he clarifies by saying this: I wrote to you in my letter not to associate with sexually immoral people. Not at all meaning the sexual immoral of this world, or the greedy, and the swindlers, and the idolaters, since then you would need to go out of this world. But now I'm writing to you not to associate with anyone who bears the name brother if he is guilty of sexual immorality or greed, or is an idolater, a reviler, a drunkard, or a swindler. And so what the Apostle Paul is doing is he's drawing a distinction between those who are within the church, who claim to have a unity of faith, and those outside the church who have no such convictions. And the Apostle Paul is saying this: listen, it's been reported to me that even in the congregation of the church, among those who claim to follow Jesus and to believe in Jesus, there are those who are actually, their identity is rooted in rebellion and sin. And he's not calling out Christians who are struggling with sin. He's calling out people whose very identity is steeped in and submerged in these lifestyles of sin with no conviction about it. And he's saying, listen, you need to purge these people from among you because you don't have a unity of faith with these people. But I'm not talking about the people of the world around you. When Jesus is asked in one particular setting what the most important law is, he responds by saying, the greatest commandment is this: love the Lord your God with all your heart, your mind, and your soul. And then he goes on to add that the second greatest commandment is this: love your neighbor as yourself. Now notice Jesus didn't say, love the neighbors around you who believe what you believe, who share your convictions. He said, love your neighbor as yourself. And so what does it look like to love your neighbor as yourself? Well, from the example of Jesus, it looks like this. It looks like it means having compassion towards the masses in a way that your heart breaks and allows you to see their great need, to see their physical needs, to see their spiritual needs, and to respond to them with love and compassion. It means this: loving your neighbor means hearing about the tragic event that happened in Orlando and allowing your heart to wrench and break like the heart of God. It means falling to your knees in prayer, asking God, begging God to bring mercy and peace and strength for those who've been affected by the great tragedy, to ask God to bring redemption to a situation that is dark and ugly, and just begging God, don't waste one tear, don't waste 1 ounce of pain that is associated with this event. God, somehow redeem it for the good of those who have been affected, and God, for your glory. Loving your neighbor looks like praying for the people in your life, in your world, who potentially are going through hard times, who are suffering, and maybe those who are just walking with a sense of blindness, praying for those people with compassion. See, when we have compassion towards people, the way that Jesus had compassion towards people, you're able to say, listen, I love you even though I don't agree with you. Here's what I believe, and here's why I believe it. But I can say that to you with a sense of gentleness and a sense of compassion that displays the love of Jesus. There's a significant difference between loving your neighbor and then having a unity of faith with someone. And it's okay to draw the line and say, this is what I believe, and it's okay. I mean, I'm not gonna be mean to you. I'm not going to speak statements of hatred towards you if you don't align with me. I'm broken for you because I want you to know the hope that we have in Jesus, but I don't have to be a jerk to you because we disagree. I hope this has been helpful for you. I know this is a very sensitive and important topic in our culture today, and I hope that you've been helped in some way by this video blog. And just encourage you to keep the questions coming. You can send those questions to questions@srchurch.tv, and we'll do our best to answer those questions as soon as we can. Be blessed. Hey, Solid Rock Church, Pastor Jason here. Excited to talk with you about the future of Solid Rock Church and the master site plan, which you'll be able to see this Sunday morning when you